I never thought a single moment could leave me frozen, staring at my phone, heart sinking, unable to move or speak. But last Christmas proved me wrong. That morning I received a short message from my mother. Ice storms coming in. Everyone's staying home. Christmas dinner is cancelled. Stay safe, Holly. I replied with a simple, thanks, love you too, and tried to understand. After all, winters in Cedar Falls, Nebraska can be brutal, and an ice storm warning wasn't anything unusual. What I didn't realize was that this simple text would be the thread that unraveled everything I believed about my family. It would expose years of quiet betrayal, hidden behind forced smiles and empty traditions. My name is Holly. I'm 54, a senior accountant at a local manufacturing firm. Nothing flashy, just steady, responsible work. I've always been the quiet one, the dependable older sister who never made waves, the one who held everything together behind the scenes. Claire, my younger sister, was the opposite. Charming, spontaneous, always surrounded by laughter and praise. I never envied her. I just wanted to be included. But that year, I received a Christmas gift no one deserves. A lie, carefully crafted, delivered without hesitation, and exposed only because someone forgot to lock their Instagram profile. Growing up in a modest two-story home on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, I used to believe that love was earned through sacrifice, that if I just did enough, gave enough, proved myself enough, my family would see me, appreciate me, maybe even love me the way they loved Claire. I was the quiet one, the daughter who always stayed in the background, never causing a scene, always doing what was expected. While Claire twirled through life like she was born for a spotlight, I learned how to iron shirts at 10, how to balance a checkbook at 12, and how to disappear emotionally without anyone noticing. When my father's arthritis worsened during my junior year of high school, it was me who stepped up to take over the yard work, run errands, and help manage bills, all while maintaining straight A's and working weekends at the grocery store. I wanted to study literature, dreamed of becoming a teacher, but that dream died quietly the day my parents sat me down and told me it would be more practical to study finance. So I folded my dream up like an old letter, put it away, and enrolled in accounting at the local university. Claire, on the other hand, never had to ask for permission. She dropped out of college after a semester to become a holistic wellness coach, which meant she bounced from yoga retreats in Costa Rica to healing circles in Sedona, posting sun-drenched photos while I picked up extra shifts to help Mom and Dad with their mortgage after Dad's health took another hit. They called Claire a free spirit, brave, adventurous, radiant, and praised her for following her heart, while I was simply dependable, predictable, and somehow never quite enough. I remember one winter vividly just 3 years ago when my father needed surgery on his spine. Without hesitation, I took 3 weeks off work, unpaid, to move back in and care for him. I managed his medication schedule, bathed him, made homemade soup, and drove him to every appointment. Claire showed up once, stayed for 40 minutes, snapped a photo with Dad while he dozed off, and left for a silent retreat in Arizona. And yet, in every retelling, Claire was the one who had been there for Dad, and I was barely mentioned. An invisible daughter in my own family's memory. It wasn't just my parents, my aunts and uncles, cousins, even old neighbours. They all fed into the same narrative. At every family reunion, someone would comment on how uptight I was, how I needed to loosen up and smile more. No one asked about the promotions I earned or the mortgage I paid off on my own. Instead, they gushed about Claire's latest venture, her Juice Cleanse brand, her 3-week yoga sabbatical in Thailand, the spiritual healing blog she started that had exactly 9 subscribers, 8 of whom were family members. I stayed quiet like I always did. I told myself that love wasn't always loud, that maybe being steady and useful was enough to matter. Every Thanksgiving, I peeled potatoes while Claire took selfies with the turkey. Every Easter, I cleaned up while Claire networked with distant cousins over mimosas. I showed up, contributed, did the work. And when I wasn't acknowledged, I swallowed it down and smiled anyway because that's what I had been taught. Keep peace, keep quiet, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be accepted one day. Just a month before that Christmas, I spent hours helping my mother prepare the house for our family Thanksgiving. I vacuumed the drapes, arranged the centerpieces, made her famous pumpkin pie from scratch, even though I hated the smell. But when dinner was served, and she stood up to thank those who had helped her, she looked across the table, beamed at Claire, and said, "We couldn't have done this without her." I froze mid-bite, the words catching in my throat. I wanted to believe she had simply misspoken, that maybe she'd thank me next, but she didn't, and I didn't say a word. So when Claire announced she'd be hosting Christmas that year, and I offered to help, planning, cooking, even cleaning up afterward, and she smiled and told me, "Let's keep it simple, Holly. I've got it all covered." I convinced myself it wasn't personal. I still believed even then in the fragile fiction of family harmony. I told myself I was overthinking things, but I wasn't. That holiday season, I didn't just lose a seat at the table. I lost the illusion I had clung to my entire life, that if I kept showing up, kept sacrificing, kept loving them despite everything, one day they'd let me fully in. What I didn't know yet was that the truth had been there all along, hiding in their silences, their shrugs, their convenient forgetfulness, and that I was about to uncover just how deep the betrayal truly ran. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of stillness only Midwestern winters can deliver. Quiet streets, a pale sky, and the distant hum of snowplows echoing through frosted neighborhoods. I wrapped myself in a thick flannel robe, brewed a pot of hazelnut coffee, and turned on the holiday classics, hoping to drown out the loneliness that crept in despite my best efforts to stay grounded. The house was warm, the scent of cinnamon lingered in the air, and yet everything felt hollow, like the stage had been set for a celebration that would never happen. It wasn't the first time I'd spent a holiday alone. Over the years, there had been plenty of birthdays, 4th of Julys, and even a Thanksgiving or two where plans had changed last minute, or events had been cancelled due to weather. But I had always given my family the benefit of the doubt. This time, however, something gnawed at me. A feeling I couldn't shake, a quiet whisper that maybe things weren't as innocent as I'd allowed myself to believe. Around mid-afternoon, as I scrolled through my phone with no real intention other than distraction, I saw it, a freshly uploaded post from my cousin Lisa. The caption read, "Another perfect Christmas at Claire's. So blessed to be surrounded by family." My thumb froze mid-scroll, my breath caught. I blinked once, twice, hoping I had misread it. But there it was, unmistakable. A wide-angle shot of Claire's lavish dining room, decorated to the nines with garlands, gold-trimmed place settings, and a roaring fire in the background. Gathered around the table were my parents, Claire, her boyfriend, 2 of our aunts, several cousins, and even Grandma June, who hadn't travelled in years due to her hip. They were all smiling, mid-toast, wearing coordinated holiday sweaters, the kind our mother used to handpick every year. But what cut deeper than the photo itself were the details I couldn't unsee. Through the bay window behind them, the sky was clear. No snow, no ice, not even a hint of the storm I had been warned about. Sunlight streamed across the table like a cruel spotlight, illuminating the faces of people who had, just 24 hours earlier, told me we were all staying home for safety. My heart pounded as I scrolled further. More photos appeared, my father carving the roast, my mother proudly arranging her signature lemon bars on a 3-tiered platter, Claire passing gifts to her nephews, everyone beaming with that easy, practiced joy that only comes when no one is pretending. And in every single frame, there was an empty seat. Mine. The realization didn't land like a thunderbolt. It unfolded slowly, like a curtain being drawn back on a scene I'd never been allowed to witness. This wasn't an oversight or a last-minute change of plans. It was deliberate, orchestrated, and carefully concealed. My phone buzzed in my hand, but I ignored it. My eyes locked on a picture of Claire laughing beside Mom, their arms around each other as if nothing in the world had ever gone wrong between them. They looked happy, whole, as if I had never existed. For a few agonizing minutes, I sat motionless, watching the carousel of curated holiday joy loop across my screen. The same family that had sent me warm messages about safety first had gathered without me, had broken bread and opened gifts and toasted to togetherness, all while ensuring that I remained in the dark. It wasn't just the exclusion that stung. It was the lie. So effortless, so confidently delivered, as if they had done it before and would do it again without a shred of remorse. I thought back to every event I'd been told was postponed or rescheduled or kept small this year. How many of those had happened without me? How many dinners, birthdays, anniversaries had they celebrated while I sat at home lighting candles for one, convincing myself that solitude was noble? I had spent years rationalizing their distance, blaming it on my career, my quiet nature, my inability to just relax and have fun. But now I saw it clearly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. And the worst part was that they had done it so easily, as if I had become a non-person in the family narrative, someone whose absence didn't need to be explained because it was already expected. They had carved me out of the picture so neatly that not even a stray glance in the photos suggested something or someone was missing. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat in the same chair where I'd unwrapped gifts alone that morning, the empty mug of cocoa still on the table, and I stared at the truth that had finally revealed itself. Not because someone confessed, but because someone forgot to hide it. And that accidental slip, that careless Instagram post, was the beginning of everything. The next morning, the world outside my window was bathed in soft golden light, but it felt colder than ever. I had barely slept, and when I did, my dreams twisted into quiet betrayals, doors closing just before I reached them, family gatherings glimpsed from behind foggy glass. I sat with my second cup of coffee, hands wrapped tightly around the ceramic, as if warmth could protect me from the slow, shattering realization that was beginning to settle over me like falling ash. The phone rang around 9 a.m. My mother's name lit up the screen with familiar ease, as if nothing had happened. "Hi, sweetheart. Hope you had a nice, quiet Christmas. We missed you." Her voice was light, almost sing-song, like a note from a greeting card that had nothing behind it. I stared at the phone for a long moment before answering, my voice steady though my heart thundered beneath the surface. "Did you?" I asked, keeping my tone even as I turned toward my laptop, where Lisa's Instagram post was still open, a gallery of carefully arranged deception. Because from what I saw, everyone seemed to have a pretty wonderful time at Claire's. There was a silence so sudden it felt like the world paused. I could imagine her face, eyes darting, lips tightening, already calculating the most plausible excuse. "Oh, well, you know how Claire can be. She decided on it last minute, and we weren't sure if you'd be comfortable with everyone there. You're always so reserved at gatherings." And in that moment, something clicked. Not like a light turning on, but more like a vault door unlocking with a groan after years of rusted neglect. The lies weren't new. They weren't accidental. They were embedded in everything, woven so thoroughly into the fabric of our family dynamic that I had mistaken them for threads of love and care. I had been edited out, quietly, efficiently, and for far longer than I was willing to admit. "So, you thought it would be better to lie to me? To make me think no one was gathering, just so I'd stay home alone while you all celebrated without me?" "Now don't be so dramatic," she sighed, a hint of annoyance creeping into her voice, as if I had created the problem by daring to name it. "We just didn't want any tension. You know how Claire wanted it to be perfect." Those words, "wanted it to be perfect," hit me harder than I expected because they revealed more than she meant them to. In her version of perfect, I didn't exist. In Claire's curated little Christmas, I was the blemish, the inconvenience, the shadow that dulled the shine. And if I was being honest with myself, this wasn't new. It had always been that way. I had just refused to see it. How many times, I asked, the words barely a whisper but edged with steel. How many other holidays, birthdays, reunions did you tell me were cancelled when you were really just cutting me out? She hesitated, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. You're being oversensitive again, Holly. This is exactly why things get awkward. You always take everything so personally. I could feel my hand tightening around the phone, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry or plead. I simply let the truth settle into my chest, heavier than grief, colder than anger. So that's it, I said softly. I'm not part of the family unless you need something. Unless you need help paying a bill, organising a party, or taking care of Dad when no one else wants to be bothered. But when it's about joy, or closeness, or togetherness, I'm suddenly too busy, too cold, too difficult to include. She didn't deny it, not really. She just pivoted like she always did. We love you both equally. It's just that Claire tries harder to be involved. You're always working. I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat like splinters. Working? You mean helping you pay off the house? Taking unpaid leave to care for Dad after his surgery? Or do you mean working every holiday so you could host the perfect dinners with Claire and never mention I existed? You need to stop this, she snapped, her voice sharpening. If this is the attitude you're going to have, maybe we need some space. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. And just like that, the call ended. The line went dead, but the silence that followed felt louder than any scream. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, while 32 years of memories reassembled themselves into something I could finally recognize for what they were. Not misunderstandings, not oversights, but decisions. Calculated, quiet decisions to keep me on the periphery, useful when needed, invisible when not. In that moment, something inside me shifted, not explosively, but permanently. A door didn't slam, but it closed. The warmth I had held onto for so long, that desperate hope that one day I would earn their love, finally extinguished itself, and in its place something else began to rise. Not rage, not revenge exactly, but clarity. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. I didn't cry that day. I didn't beg to be understood. Instead, I opened my laptop, still sitting at the kitchen table where I had eaten Christmas dinner alone, and I began to write. Not a journal entry, not a letter seeking reconciliation, but a statement, a declaration, a release. And though I didn't know it yet, that simple act of writing would become the first step in reclaiming the life they had spent years quietly erasing me from. I don't remember setting the phone down after that call. I only remember the silence afterward. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, but hollow. Like the absence of something you've chased for too long and only now realize never existed in the first place. The coffee had gone cold in my cup, the Christmas candles had burned halfway down, and outside a fresh dusting of snow fell quietly over the street, indifferent to the unravelling that had just occurred in my living room. My laptop remained open on the kitchen table, the photos still flickering in the browser window as if to remind me that the betrayal wasn't imagined. It was captured, time-stamped, and posted for the world to see. I stared at the images again, not to torture myself, but to anchor what I was about to do in reality. I needed to confront her, not for her apology, which I now understood would never come, but for the clarity that speaking the truth aloud might finally give me. I picked up the phone again and called her. This time, I didn't wait for a cheery voice or false warmth. I spoke first. You lied. There was a pause, just long enough to confirm that she knew exactly what I meant. Excuse me, she said, her tone a mix of rehearsed confusion and weary annoyance. You lied about Christmas. You lied to me about everyone staying home because of a storm that didn't exist. You told me you missed me while passing the cranberry sauce across a table I wasn't welcome at. I've seen the photos, Mom. She didn't respond right away. I could hear the soft background noise of her TV, the clinking of a spoon against a teacup, and I pictured her sitting in her floral armchair, already preparing a new version of the truth. Oh, Holly, don't be like this. It all came together at the last minute. Claire was hosting, and you know how tense things can get when you're around a lot of people. We didn't want any awkwardness. Her voice trailed off, but it was already too late. The damage had been done, not just from this lie, but from the hundreds that came before it, subtle and sharp as paper cuts that you only notice once they've turned raw. So, instead of talking to me like an adult, you decided to stage a lie and let me spend Christmas alone thinking everyone else was doing the same. That's not awkwardness, Mom. That's cruelty. Don't be so dramatic, she said, her voice clipped now, defensive and familiar. You always overreact and make everything about you. This is why we didn't want to deal with it this year. Claire just wanted something peaceful. The word peaceful sat bitter on my tongue because what she meant was perfect, and in their perfect version of family, there was no room for someone like me. Too serious, too honest, too unwilling to fake a smile when things weren't right. How long? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. How many times have you done this to me? How many events were never actually cancelled but simply happened without me? Another pause, this one heavier, and I could almost hear the scrambling behind her silence, the shifting of stories she could no longer keep straight. You're reading too much into this, Holly. It's not some big conspiracy. You've always been a little difficult. You never liked being around people, and we just thought. You thought it would be easier to erase me, I interrupted, my voice steadier than I expected. You thought if you didn't invite me, you wouldn't have to explain me. You could paint your perfect holiday and pretend I was just too busy or too cold or too tired. But the truth is, you've been excluding me for years, haven't you? You've made me invisible one small lie at a time. Her tone shifted then, something sharper, something practiced. If this is the attitude you're going to carry, then maybe we need to take a little space. You've always had this chip on your shoulder, and now you're lashing out like a child. When you're ready to be reasonable, maybe we can talk again. There it was, the final twist of the knife, the subtle shift of blame, the refusal to acknowledge the pain she caused, and the expectation that I would once again swallow my hurt and apologize for daring to feel it. But I didn't apologize, not this time. I let her words hang in the air before replying with quiet resolve. No, Mom. We don't need space. We've already had it for decades. I was just the only one who didn't see it. And then, for the first time in my life, I ended the conversation on my terms. I pressed end call, not in anger, but in clarity. And as the screen went dark, I felt something lift, something heavy and old and long overdue. That conversation didn't break me, it freed me. Because in finally naming what had been done to me, I reclaimed the part of myself that had been chipped away year after year, lie after lie. I wasn't dramatic, I wasn't difficult, I was done. After that final conversation with my mother, the quiet that followed wasn't empty, it was reflective, and in it, memories began resurfacing, not like sudden flashes, but like steady waves that had always been there, waiting for me to finally stop pretending they were harmless. It was as though I had spent years walking through a house with dimmed lights, and now, room by room, the brightness was returning, revealing cracks I had long convinced myself were normal. I remembered the Thanksgiving 3 years ago, when my mother insisted she couldn't possibly host unless someone helped her, just this once. And I, despite an exhausting month-end deadline at work, drove the full 2 hours to her house after a 12-hour shift. I scrubbed the silverware, rearranged the living room, and spent the entire afternoon preparing the meal while Claire breezed in 2 hours late, her hair still wet from a salon blowout, holding a store-bought pie she had forgotten to thaw. She smiled, kissed Mom on the cheek, snapped a few photos for her blog, and left before dessert, citing an early morning meditation class. At dinner, when Mom raised her glass to give thanks, she smiled fondly and said, "We couldn't have done this without Claire." I had laughed at the time, quiet, hollow, but it wasn't funny. It was familiar. There were dozens of moments like that, small cuts that never seemed deep enough to justify outrage, but always seemed to hit the same place. A wound that never healed because I kept letting them open it. When Dad had his hip replaced, I was the one who took unpaid leave, sleeping on the old recliner in their living room for 3 weeks, helping him bathe and keeping a chart of his medications. Claire came by once, stayed just long enough to post a selfie beside his hospital bed, and left with the excuse that her energy wasn't compatible with hospitals. Months later, I overheard my parents tell relatives how Claire had rushed home to be there when Dad was recovering, while I apparently was in and out. They told the stories they wanted to believe, the ones where Claire was the golden child, the devoted daughter, the shining light who brought joy and sparkle to every room, while I was the one who faded into the wallpaper, useful only when something needed fixing or funding. Even at casual gatherings, the narrative held. At family cookouts, aunts would pull me aside and ask why I wasn't more like Claire, while uncles gave me puzzled looks when I mentioned a recent promotion or a financial milestone, quickly pivoting to ask whether Claire had found a publisher yet for her travel memoir. She hadn't written more than 10 pages, but that didn't matter. The idea of her was always more exciting than the reality of me. It didn't seem to matter that I was the one who helped our parents with their bills when Dad's retirement savings dwindled, or that I loaned Claire money, twice, when she was launching her wellness podcast, and later her kombucha line. She never paid me back. When I gently brought it up, my mother waved it off with a chuckle, saying, "She's just trying to find her way, sweetie. You've always been the responsible one. You understand." And I did understand. Too well. I understood that in their eyes, responsibility wasn't something to admire. It was something expected. It wasn't a virtue. It was a utility. I was never praised because I was never supposed to need praise. I was there to carry weight, to absorb pressure, to disappear gracefully so that Claire could shine without shadows. But what hurt the most wasn't the imbalance. It was how I enabled it. I had kept showing up, kept helping, kept swallowing disappointment and telling myself that family meant forgiveness, that maybe next time they'd see me, thank me, include me. I had waited for scraps of recognition, like a child pressing her nose to the glass outside a warm house, hoping someone inside would remember she belonged there too. The worst part was that for most of my life, I truly believed I was the problem. That if I were just a little more fun, a little less serious, a little more open or warm or likable, things would be different. I didn't realize I was trying to change myself to fit into a family that never made room for who I actually was. And now, sitting in the stillness of my own home, surrounded by the silence of a holiday I had spent alone while they celebrated without me, I could finally see it all clearly. The favoritism, the revisionist history, the gaslighting. It hadn't been isolated incidents. It had been a system. And I had played along for too long, hoping that loyalty would eventually breed inclusion. But it didn't. It never would. And in that realization, something within me shifted, not into rage, but into resolve. I was done asking to be seen. I was ready to be heard. After days of pacing the floor, replaying every word, every glance, every silent betrayal, I realized I had spent a lifetime softening the blow for people who never cared whether I bled. I had always been measured, always polite, always willing to give the benefit of the doubt, even when I had nothing left to give. But this time, I had reached the edge. And instead of stepping back, I decided to speak. Not in rage, not in desperation, but with clarity that had taken decades to crystallize. I opened my laptop on a quiet Tuesday evening. The house was still. Outside, the wind curled around the edges of the windows, rattling the shutters as if urging me to begin. The cursor blinked against a blank email, and for the first time in my life, I didn't hold back. I addressed it to everyone: my parents, Claire, my aunts and uncles, cousins, even distant relatives who had smiled to my face while excluding me from everything behind my back. If they had sat at that Christmas table without me, they would now read the truth I had spent years too afraid to speak. Subject: in case there's any confusion about what you did. My fingers moved quickly, not because I was angry, though I was, but because the words had been sitting in me for so long they no longer needed permission. I told them what I had seen. I attached screenshots, Mom's text about the ice storm, and Lisa's Instagram photos of the party I had been deliberately kept from. I reminded them that this wasn't the first time, and I asked, calmly but directly, how many more times they had sat at a full table while I ate alone, believing their lies. I didn't accuse, I stated, I didn't beg, I confirmed, and when I wrote the final line, I deserve better than this. I always have. I felt something shift in the air around me, like the house itself had exhaled. I hit send before I could question myself. I closed the laptop gently, poured a glass of water and sat on the sofa, expecting nothing but dreading everything. The first response came from Aunt Meredith. It was short, defensive, and entirely unhelpful. She claimed there must have been a mix-up, that perhaps someone forgot to loop me in. Then came Uncle Dennis, who called me sensitive and suggested I should just move on because Christmas is just a day. But the one that truly stung came from Lisa, the very cousin whose social media post had unveiled the truth. She deleted her original photos within the hour and messaged me privately not to apologize, but to say I was causing drama and trying to ruin the family vibe. Next came Claire with a long, self-righteous email dripping with condescension, accusing me of lashing out and making everything about myself. She wrote, "You never enjoy these events anyway. I just wanted one peaceful holiday without your energy dragging everyone down. You think it's about you, but maybe we were trying to protect you from feeling out of place." That line, the idea that they had lied to me for my own good, was the final insult wrapped in faux concern. And yet, it was my parents' response that struck the deepest chord, not for what it said, but for how utterly predictable it was. Instead of reflection or remorse, my mother called our old family friends, spinning a narrative that I was having a breakdown, that I had always been too intense, and now was simply lashing out. My father, ever the stoic protector of the family image, sent a curt email reminding me of the importance of discretion, scolding me for airing family matters, and threatening to re-evaluate my place in future arrangements if I didn't get back in line. The next day, Claire texted, "Mom's crying. Dad's furious. You've really done it now. This is exactly why we didn't invite you." I read that text again and again, not with pain, but with a kind of stunned clarity. There it was, the truth. Not only had they lied, but they believed I deserved to be lied to. They had rewritten the story to make me the villain, not because it was true, but because it was easier than admitting they were wrong. They had spent years moulding me into the scapegoat, and now that I had stopped playing along, they were losing control of the narrative they had worked so hard to protect. They hadn't expected me to push back. They never thought I'd speak up. And the fact that I had dared to break the script was more threatening to them than anything I could have possibly said. I wasn't creating conflict. I was exposing the one that had always been there, buried beneath years of forced smiles, obligatory hugs, and hollow "we love yous," spoken through clenched teeth. What they didn't realize was that their fury no longer scared me. Their disappointment no longer mattered. The weight I had carried for years, of proving my worth, of earning my seat at their table, had been lifted not because they gave me what I needed, but because I finally stopped asking for it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to belong. I was demanding to be respected. And they didn't know what to do with that. About a week after I sent that email, after the backlash, the gaslighting and the smears, just as the emotional dust had begun to settle, and I had convinced myself that closure might be something I'd have to give myself without answers, I received a message that would change everything. It was from Rachel Knox, a name I hadn't seen pop up on my phone in over a decade. She had once been a close family friend, someone who used to handle bookkeeping and finances for my father's manufacturing company before retiring and moving to a quieter life in rural Minnesota. Her message was simple, almost cryptic. Holly, I've been following what's happening. There's something you need to know. Can we meet? We agreed to meet the next afternoon at a small cafe halfway between our towns, one of those old roadside diners with peeling booths and bottomless coffee that always smells slightly burnt. Rachel looked different than I remembered. Older, thinner, her once sharp features softened by time and perhaps the burden of a truth she had carried far too long. She sat across from me, fidgeting with the handle of a worn leather envelope, and after an awkward silence, she slid it across the table like someone handing over a confession. I wasn't sure whether I should get involved, she said softly, but after seeing how they're treating you, I can't stay quiet anymore. I've been holding on to this for years. Inside the envelope were photocopies of old bank records, notarized documents, and legal correspondence dating back nearly 2 decades. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at, until I saw the name that made my breath catch: my grandfather, Joseph Whitaker, and beneath it, the words, beneficiary, Holly Whitaker. As I flipped through the pages, Rachel began to explain, carefully at first, as if unsure whether I could handle what was coming. My grandfather, a quiet man who had passed away just before my college graduation, had left behind a substantial inheritance earmarked specifically for me, nearly $300,000, placed in a trust intended to support my education and future well-being. He had set it up with clear instructions. The funds were to be released to me upon turning 25, with my father named as temporary trustee. But I had never seen a dime. I had gone through college on student loans and night jobs, turning down graduate school because I couldn't afford it, while helping my parents pay their mortgage and supporting Claire through 2 failed business ventures. He was supposed to give you access to the trust when you reached the age clause, Rachel said, but instead he quietly closed the account and funneled the money to Claire's LLC. I didn't know everything at the time, but I saw the transfers. I was under the impression it was family approved. Now I realize it wasn't. I felt the world tilt beneath me, not violently, but in that slow, sickening way that makes you question the foundation of every belief you've built your life on. Rachel wasn't done. There's more, she continued, pulling out another set of forms, ones I recognized immediately. I had signed them when I was barely 18, told they were just standard medical permissions in case of emergencies. But they weren't. They were broad power of attorney documents, and they had allowed my parents to sell property that had also been willed to both Claire and me. Real estate my grandfather had invested in for our futures, split evenly in his will but sold quietly behind my back, with the proceeds again wired entirely to Claire. I don't remember finishing my coffee. I don't even recall leaving the diner. I only remember clutching that envelope like it was oxygen, stepping into the frigid January air and realizing that everything, the favoritism, the gaslighting, the exclusion, the guilt trips about money, had been not just emotional abuse but actual, tangible theft. It wasn't just betrayal. It was embezzlement. It was fraud. It was family crime dressed in Sunday best and wrapped in the bow of "we're doing what's best." The part that broke me wasn't the money. It was the intent. They had watched me struggle, heard me talk about working 2 jobs, accepted my help with their bills, and still looked me in the eye as if I owed them more. All while spending my inheritance on Claire's failed wellness retreats in Santa Fe and her organic bath bomb startup in Seattle, which collapsed after 3 months. The praise, the parties, the pedestal, they had built it using what was meant to build me. "Why now?" I asked Rachel, my voice barely steady. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because I saw the posts your mother made, painting you as unstable, as dramatic. I realized they weren't just trying to shame you. They were trying to discredit you in case you ever discovered the truth. And Holly, what they did isn't just immoral, it's illegal. Her words didn't ignite rage, they lit a fuse that had long gone damp from suppression and silence. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was armed with facts, with documents, with undeniable proof. And unlike the girl I used to be, the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, I had nothing left to lose. And everything to reclaim. When I got home from the diner, I didn't collapse into a heap of grief or rage. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't pace the house tearing through old photo albums or replaying the past in an endless loop of regret. What I felt was something quieter but far more dangerous. Clarity. It settled into me like breath returning after a long choke, and it gave shape to something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Purpose. I had spent decades being the steady one, the fixer, the silent supporter, the adult in every room where others behaved like children in designer coats. But now I was done fixing things I didn't break. I wasn't interested in screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. I wanted results. And thankfully, I was equipped for this moment in a way no one in my family had anticipated. By day, I worked as a senior auditor for a national logistics firm. Quiet work, dry to most, but built on the kind of precision that could expose embezzlement with a single misfiled transfer. I had spent my career tracing money through corporate shell games and unravelling frauds that stretched across counties and LLCs. What my parents had done, using power of attorney documents to liquidate assets, reroute inheritance funds, and retitle property, wasn't just unethical, it was traceable. They had underestimated me because I had let them. That week, I didn't speak to anyone. I turned off my phone, pulled out a legal pad, and started mapping every transaction Rachel's documents referenced. I logged into the county record system and began tracing the chain of title on the real estate my grandfather had willed to Claire and me, noting when properties were sold, who signed the sale papers, and how the funds had been routed. The more I uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Forged signatures, questionable authorizations, transfers made suspiciously close to Claire's business launches, each transaction dressed up just enough to avoid scrutiny. But not from me. I cross-referenced the data with what little financial information I still had access to. Old emails from my father, tax filings from the years I helped him with returns, even a saved voicemail where he had once thanked me vaguely for covering those gaps. My stomach twisted as I listened to it again, realizing that even then he had likely been referring to money he had stolen. By Friday, I had a complete timeline, a paper trail that could tell the story better than I ever could in words. But I knew I couldn't do this alone. Not legally, not strategically. So I called Sarah Chen, a former colleague of mine who had gone into private law and now specialized in estate litigation and fiduciary abuse. She had always been sharp, no-nonsense, and fiercely protective of people who had been taken advantage of. When I walked her through the documents, she didn't flinch. "This is classic misappropriation," she said, flipping through the photocopies with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen it before. "You have power of attorney misuse, financial elder abuse, and property fraud all rolled into one. If you want to go forward, I'll take the case. We can file both civil charges and prepare a criminal referral." I sat with the weight of that for a long moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I had never imagined I would be sitting across from an attorney discussing a legal case against my own parents and sister. But as I looked at the documents, the ones with my signature forged, the ones that had stripped away my future, I realized I wasn't the one who had made this about money. They had. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was enforcing a boundary they never believed I'd have the strength to draw. Still, I wasn't ready to go straight to court. Not yet. As satisfying as it might have been to serve them with papers, I wanted to offer them something they had never offered me. A chance. One chance to take responsibility, to undo what they could before the consequences became permanent. It wasn't out of kindness. It was out of strategy, because I knew if they refused, the law would not. With Sarah's help, I compiled 3 identical packets, one for each of them: my mother, my father, and Claire. Inside each folder was a comprehensive breakdown of the fraud, copies of the bank transfers, a letter outlining their violations, and a formal proposal: return the remaining funds, sign an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and agree to corrective repayment terms, or face full legal action. I wasn't bluffing. Sarah had already drafted the paperwork. We agreed to schedule the meeting on neutral ground, my apartment, early Saturday morning. Sarah would be on call. I cleared the kitchen table, laid out the folders in 3 neat rows, and waited. When they arrived, they walked in with the same mixture of superiority and scripted concern they had always worn when they wanted to look innocent. My mother reached for my hand. My father smiled with artificial warmth, and Claire gave me the same tight hug she always did when cameras weren't around. "We're glad you reached out," my mother said, her tone implying she believed I had come to apologize. "Sit down," I replied. "We're not here to talk. We're here to read." And with that, I slid the folders across the table. What followed wasn't a meltdown. It was silence, the kind that builds when people realize the script they've rehearsed no longer fits the stage they've stepped onto. My father turned pale, flipping pages quickly, his fingers shaking. Claire sat back, her mouth slightly open, blinking rapidly like she couldn't process what she was seeing. My mother read slowly, then folded her arms, her expression hardening. "What is this supposed to be?" she said at last, trying to regain control. "It's your chance," I said, meeting her eyes. "One chance to make this right before the courts get involved." They didn't speak again right away, and in that moment, I saw the truth land. Not just the fear, but the recognition that I wasn't asking. I was deciding. And for the first time, I knew they finally understood who they were dealing with. After they left my apartment, my mother stiff with forced composure, my father practically dragging Claire, who had barely said a word, the quiet that followed wasn't satisfying the way I had imagined it might be. It wasn't triumphant or vindicating in any cinematic way. It was somber, still. A kind of breathless stillness that comes only after a dam has cracked open and you're waiting to see whether the water will recede or drown everything in its path. I gave them 48 hours, as outlined in the final paragraph of the letter enclosed in each folder. 48 hours to return the remaining funds, sign the written admission of guilt prepared by Sarah, and begin restitution. It was a final gesture of grace, though it didn't feel graceful, just necessary, methodical, and deeply personal. And as I expected, they did nothing. At first there was silence. No email, no call, no reply of any kind. Then, subtle signs of scrambling began to emerge. Claire started deleting years of social media posts with suspicious haste, removing any trace of the yoga retreats she'd funded with my inheritance. My father closed 2 business accounts registered in Claire's name, likely trying to shift funds before they could be legally frozen. My mother, true to form, began calling family friends and spinning a carefully orchestrated narrative about how I had gone off the rails and was threatening the family over money that didn't exist. But what none of them knew, or perhaps refused to believe, was that while they were trying to bury the evidence, I had already unearthed and preserved every trace of it. Bank records had been copied, property documents secured, transaction histories downloaded and certified. Sarah had submitted a preliminary file to the district court the morning after the deadline expired. By that afternoon, search warrants had been signed and served. The call came from Sarah just before sunset. Her tone was calm, but I could hear the steel behind her words. "They moved too late. We had enough. The authorities are executing the warrants now." I didn't rush to watch the fallout. I didn't sit in front of the television waiting for breaking news or refresh social media to see their carefully curated reputations crumble. But by the end of the day, I didn't have to look. It found me. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years texted, asking if what he'd read in the local paper was true. An old college friend forwarded me a post from a community forum where people were gossiping about the Whittaker family scandal. By evening, it was undeniable. My father had been escorted from his office in handcuffs. My mother had been served at a local charity luncheon, publicly removed by law enforcement, while stunned acquaintances looked on. Claire's so-called wellness studio had been shuttered pending asset seizure. Her name had been flagged in court filings as a direct beneficiary of fraudulently acquired funds. And just like that, the house of cards they had built so carefully on lies, omissions, and the exploitation of my silence collapsed, without me having to raise my voice once. The family group chat, which had once buzzed with wedding updates, baby pictures, and holiday invitations, most of which I was never included in, went eerily quiet. The few relatives who had rushed to defend them earlier, calling me too intense or ungrateful, disappeared into digital shadows. A few reached out privately, tiptoeing into my inbox with half-hearted apologies or vague inquiries meant to gauge how far I was willing to take it. But it didn't matter anymore. Not their opinions, not their loyalties, not their guilt. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt weightless. For years, I had carried the burden of trying to make them see me, to make them love me in the ways I had seen them love each other. With ease, with warmth, with a kind of open-armed affection I had never received. But now I understood. They had never truly seen me because they had never needed to. I was convenient until I became inconvenient, invisible, until I stood my ground. That week, Rachel called again. She had seen the news, seen the charges, seen the arrests. She didn't say much, but before we hung up, she told me something I hadn't expected to need so much. Your grandfather would have been proud, not because of the lawsuit, but because you finally stopped protecting people who never protected you. And she was right. Justice wasn't just about criminal charges or restitution. It was about reclaiming my voice after years of silencing it for the sake of harmony that never existed. It was about no longer shrinking to make others feel comfortable, no longer contorting myself to fit a family mold that was never made for me. And most of all, it was about drawing a line so firm, so undeniable, that even those who had spent a lifetime stepping over me could no longer pretend they didn't see it. They thought I would break, but I didn't. I calculated. I built. I executed. And I walked away standing taller than they had ever allowed me to stand. 1 year later, I find myself standing at the window of my new home just outside Asheville, North Carolina, where the morning fog drapes across the blue hills like a soft reminder that even after devastation, beauty can still rise and take its place. It's a smaller house than I ever imagined living in, tucked behind a narrow gravel road and surrounded by tall pines that whisper with the wind. But it is mine. Entirely mine. Bought not with revenge, but with resolution. Paid for not with bitterness, but with peace. The court case ended months ago. My parents both accepted plea deals, less out of remorse than strategy, and agreed to restitution terms that are still ongoing. Claire, stripped of her public image and her wellness empire, has since relocated and, from what I hear, works the front desk at a fitness centre in a town small enough not to ask questions. I don't keep tabs on them, not out of forgiveness, but because I've learned that letting go doesn't mean excusing the pain. It means refusing to let it define your future. Most of the extended family fell silent after the verdict, their loyalty not so much disappearing as dissolving in the light of exposed truth. A few reached out, not to grovel or explain, but to share memories, to say they had seen what was happening and hadn't known what to do. I didn't blame them. Silence is learned just as surely as courage is. The difference is what you choose when the truth finally knocks. What surprised me most, though, was how quickly the space they left behind filled itself, not with new family, but with genuine people who had no stake in who I had been to someone else. Colleagues who now saw me as more than the quiet woman who always stayed late and never talked about holidays. neighbours who brought firewood and recipes instead of assumptions, and a few distant cousins, people I had barely known, who admitted they had once believed the narrative until the documents spoke louder than the gossip. Rachel came to visit last week. We sat on my porch sipping hot tea as the sun dipped behind the trees, and before she left, she handed me an old photo album she'd found while cleaning out her storage unit. Inside were pictures I had nearly forgotten existed, snapshots of my grandfather and me from summers long gone, fishing at the lake, laughing over burnt marshmallows, building birdhouses out of scrap wood. In one photo, I'm about 9 years old, grinning with a missing front tooth as he lifts me up toward the camera, his eyes soft with the kind of love that doesn't need proving. "He always said you were the strong one," Rachel told me gently. "He knew they favoured Claire, but he believed you'd rise anyway. That's why he left you what he did. Not just the money, but the message behind it." I sat with that photo long after she drove away, running my thumb along the worn edge of the page, not because it hurt, but because it reminded me of what I'd almost forgotten. That I was never truly alone. That someone, even in silence, had believed in me. And though it took me years, I finally lived up to that belief. Not by fighting fire with fire, but by refusing to stay small in a world that benefited from my shrinking. I used to think the best revenge was justice. But now I know better. The best revenge is freedom. The kind that doesn't demand recognition, that doesn't wait for an apology, that doesn't need an audience to know its worth. It's waking up in a home that is yours, smiling at your reflection not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is hidden anymore. It's finding joy in the simple, quiet moments. The click of a coffee maker in the morning, the sound of your own name spoken with respect, the steady knowledge that you no longer owe anyone a version of yourself they can live with. So if you're out there, sitting in silence, feeling invisible, trying to be enough for people who have already decided you aren't, let this story be your reminder. You don't have to stay where you're not seen. You don't have to keep proving your worth to those committed to not recognizing it. You are allowed to walk away. And sometimes, walking away isn't defeat. It's the beginning of everything. If this story touched you or reminded you of your own journey, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Someone out there may need the reminder that quiet strength is still strength, and that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply walks out the door and never looks back. Subscribe to The Underdog's Revenge for more stories of resilience, justice, and quiet triumph. Because you deserve to be heard.